Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Halloween episode
It's
of,
Halloween!
of the Talking Nerdy podcast. So happy Halloween to all of you out there. Today we are going to be talking about, surprise, surprise, ghost stories.
Ooh, who are we, though?
Who are we?
You're Aaron, I'm Sam.
Oh, yeah. That's
didn't-
Megan.
That you point off camera.
I'm moving out.
What?
Too many ghosts in this house.
Right. So, you brought up a good point, Sam, that first we should establish our personal level of belief in these things.
Because we're all like, we'll research ghost stories, talk about ghost stories and our own experiences with ghosts and things. And I'm like, well, maybe like right off the bat, we should talk about our own personal belief in ghosts.
Yeah. Well, this was your idea,
You want me
so
to start?
lead the
you're
way.
looking at me like, and?
And?
I specifically wanted to establish our own personal thoughts on ghosts because I feel like going into this, I'm going to be a big old buzzkill. Because as much as I love spooky stuff, and I love the spooky season, I am a skeptic to heck. A hectic skeptic. I don't necessarily believe in most things supernatural or paranormal, but very much in the line of X-Files, I want to believe. I want to believe so bad, and I think it would be really cool if all these things were true, but I cannot convince myself that they're true, and there's so much out there that debunks it, so... And I don't know. It's like when we talked about cryptids, I don't put a lot of stock into
Mothman.
what people say.
Right.
I love Mothman. I wish it was real. I wish he was that cool statue with great abs and a good butt. But, but he's probably not.
But in reality, he's probably not.
He's probably a big barn owl that someone got scared of. So that's my thoughts on ghosts and the supernatural.
Yeah.
What are yours?
Mine. Okay, so we were kind of talking before we started recording because we always do this.
This is just how we talk.
Right.
We just happen to put a recorder in front of us for a podcast sometimes.
Is that, for me, a ghost, what makes it a ghost as opposed to a spirit or energy? I don't know. This is kind of my personal where I draw the line. Is with a ghost, I feel like it has to be intelligent and have an identity. You know, that it was a person that was living, and they still retain an intelligence and an awareness of who they are. You know, so like when people say they talk to deceased relatives and things, you know, that to me would be a ghost. And I don't so much believe in that. I don't really buy into the ghosts or having a back and forth conversation with someone who is no longer, you know, here.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do... Oh, thanks. I do believe in energy and the, you know, conservation of matter and conservation of energy. That there can be residual energies, you know, energy and matter kind of caught in a loop outside of time. So the footsteps, the moving of things, the sounds of a clinking bottle in an empty bar, you know, things like that, I believe can slip through. So I buy that, you know, but not so much the intelligent, you know, ghost of great grandmother coming to me at night to give me advice. Yeah. But you know, when you hear sounds and I mean buildings themselves can hold on to things. I believe old buildings specifically can be alive in that sense.
Oh, I really believe that. Even where we...
Well,
like,
okay,
Megan,
take
what
it
are
away,
your beliefs?
Megan. Your turn.
Well, sorry, but like even walking into... We work in a lot of old buildings from the 1800s, and even walking into those, like, you feel different in the energy.
Yeah, they're not just empty.
They're not empty, like, they feel full, you know? Because a lot of them had a lot of different purposes over many years, and a lot of different people were in them and used them.
Right.
Do you think you would feel that way if you didn't know the history of the buildings and you just wandered into an old building one day?
I feel that way even when I just wander into old buildings. So, like, because we're interested in history and, like, that's part of our job and, like, just how we've, like, been friends and whatever. We like the three of us have gone on trips where there's a lot of history involved in old buildings. And it's just, I don't know, I just walk in and I just kind of feel something. But then again, for me, in terms of like what I believe, is mine changes over time as I learn more and more and I like see more stories and different things. And it's difficult to me because it's similar, like I want to believe, like I genuinely want to believe in people and like their stories, and if someone I knew was like, this happened to me, like I would believe them. But I think, I don't know, I used to think of it like as like there was residual energy for things that just kind of happen, but if it's like intelligent, like it's interacting with you, I've always kind of thought that to be like demons. Because I feel like if it has the power to have enough
power and intelligence, it's not human.
I feel like it's non-human, but there's a lot of stories that contradict that, so I'm just a person that thinks like I don't know everything, and I think like it's okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're probably just, I would consider you just like open-minded.
But yeah, basically I'm open-minded, but like I don't really set like saying like I believe this or I do or don't believe this. It's more just like I'm open to seeing it. I like to hear about these things and learn about them. And, you know, I think it just depends on situations.
I feel that. I'm, like, eternally interested in ghost stories and spooky things.
Right.
And then if you ask me if I believe in it, I'd say heck no.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And for me, like, that's the thing is I think I would be close to skeptical as you as well. If I didn't have a few instances where, like, I felt an energy so strong where I'm like, I don't know, you have to lift, like, something inside you just makes you listen to it. If I didn't have that kind of thing a couple of times happen in my life, I feel like I'd be full skeptic too, but because I'm more like, I'm open-minded. Because there's been times energies have affected me.
I'd consider you to be a fairly, like, a person who's sort of in tap with, like, intuition. So I can sort of see that playing into your thoughts on ghosties.
Which is, and here's the thing, and this is something I've also, like, I think in my family run, like, I feel like intuition in my family and, like, almost, like, sensitivities or empath tendencies, like, runs in my family a lot. Like, I think my grandmother is either an empath or close to empath. I know my mom has, like, a lot of intuition and, like, she for sure is either, I could see her being close to an empath, just stuff like that. Like, there's been times, like, my mom has called me, and there was one time I was having to come home, and it was late, and, like, my mom called me on the road because she had a dream, because she goes to bed early, she had this dream that I was on the side of the road calling for my dad, and I was, like, in a car accident. And I almost got into a car accident that night, but I was extra cautious because she had called me. Because, like, I know my mom's, like... basically when my mom says something to me, like, don't do this, or, like, you need to come home, or, like, something like that, where she's just like, I have a gut feeling, like...
Right, but that has nothing to do with ghosts. That just has to do with sensitivity.
That's just what I mean, though, is, like, because sensitivity kind of runs in my family, like, I feel like I've had interactions with things.
Yeah, I believe in that level of sensitivity, especially between family.
Sorry, I just talked
a lot. But I
I
don't think that extends beyond the grave.
No, it's so easy to go on tangents from, like, talking about ghosts to things like that, though. And I feel like sometimes that has to do with whether you believe in people or the person telling the story. Like you said, you're like, I believe when, like, one of my friends says, this happened to me. And I'm like, I believe that they feel that this happened to them, but I don't necessarily believe that exactly what they're saying happened. Because there's always a million sides to every story. Right. Whereas some people are like, I believe in the person. And so whether it's about ghosts or, like, psychic stuff...
That's what I mean, I believe their truth.
Fair enough. You know I believe that they think they experienced something. Yeah. And I don't want to be like, I'm an asshole, but I'm not that big of an asshole where I'm like, that didn't happen to you. I'm like, I wasn't there. Who am I to say that?
Right. But also there's, like, so many things that go, because that's the other, like, along with ghosts comes, like, people asking, like, psychology of things. And so that's why, for me, I think ghosts can be a lot of different things, and I think that can also depend on your energies and your psychological state. And, because of that, like, so if someone was to tell me, like, this really happened, And it was, it would be me believing their truth, because, like, I don't know, because, like, for me, it's not saying, like, oh, you could, I don't know how to explain this well.
I feel you, though. As an aspiring neuroscientist,
Yeah.
I've read a lot about different people's delusions and hallucinations based on
Yeah.
brain chemistry and things like that. And I'm like, these people see these things. There's no doubt. But it doesn't mean that everyone sees
They could
them
have
or everyone
interpreted a
experienced.
ghost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and then
So that's all I
to
thought
some
about.
people,
Anyways.
they could say that is still seeing a ghost, that a delusion is a ghost of the mind,
I
but
think it is.
we're talking about ghosts in the sense of a deceased person.
Yeah.
That's true. Spirits.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
do we want to go into our stories now?
Yeah, so we each picked a story.
Yeah. And then, so we're going to each say our story and then our personal story.
After.
After?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think we should all run through
I'm just making
Go down
sure.
the
the ghost stories or haunted locations that we each selected, and then at
Heck
the end
yeah.
we'll kind of have a discussion about if we've had any experiences ourselves and what we think of them.
For show.
And then we'll tell each other that they're wrong.
You look at me as you say this. I'm not going to say you're wrong.
I know. You go first.
But fine.
So it's just the way we're sitting. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
All right.
I go last.
Okay.
Do you want to go first?
You went last time. That's
Yeah,
true.
you
You
go
go first.
Wait, what?
Oh, you shouldn't have protested. You're first now. Go.
Okay. My ghost story is actually, it's not fully a ghost story. Okay.
Just tell us what it is.
It's
me a
so
story,
basically,
Megan.
I've recently watched The Haunting of Hill House
Okay.
on Netflix. If you haven't seen it and you're listening to this podcast, I hope you listen or see that on Netflix, because it's really, really good. And it's also based off a novel, and it was just well done, I think. But anyways,
Recommend.
I recommend it. It was interesting, but it's also, so I'm basically telling the story of what some people relate Hell House to.
So it's based on a book, and the book isn't specifically based on an event, but some people say it sounds similar to an event.
So there's so there's multiple things. So basically, the book is inspired by a couple events based on like what the author has said. So the author of the original novel, where there's a paranormal investigator that has two women help him investigate Hill House. This is in the novel.
What's the name of the novel?
I believe it's called.
It's fine. You don't need to.
I'm
look
pretty
it
sure
up.
it's called The
Never mind.
Haunting of Hill House.
It probably is, if they made the
Just keep
show
talking,
based
it's
on
fine.
it.
Yeah, it's Shirley Jackson's 1959 novel.
Oh, so it's
the
pretty
same.
old. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's
So-
called The Haunting of Hill House. Okay.
Yeah, so she said that she based it off of the Winchester House,
Oh, okay.
and then also the Harlem fire from, what year was that? I don't remember. But basically the story I'm telling is a debunked account called The Adventure, which is an account from the early 1900s, 1911. And it was from these two women who visited the Palace of Versailles, excuse me, in
Vintage
1901.
ghosts.
Huh?
Vintage ghosts.
Yes.
And this
I love it.
was debunked.
So yes, well, it wasn't. I don't know for sure if it was fully debunked, like from my research, but it was basically like highly skepticized.
What does this have to do with Hill House?
This is what. So basically, the way that this
What the
has to do with
novel
Hill
is
House
based
is they say there's one ghost story that comes closest to being the true story behind the Haunting of Hill House. So there's one ghost story or ghost account that best matches up with what happens in this show, which is like kind of the passage through time, like seeing snippets of time all kind of jumbled up.
And that's based on this Versailles investigation?
Yeah, and the
Okay.
reason I brought this in is because a big thing throughout like Haunting of Hill House is like they're saying like ghosts can be wishes and ghosts can be stories, and like ghosts are all of these things because like it's a mix of seeing like a family's interworkings and like mental health mixed in with this haunted place.
Okay.
And so in An Adventure by Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, they're talking about how they slipped through time when they visited the Palace of Versailles. And they originally put this account under pseudonyms, and people would like kind of make fun of it or be skeptics of it. And then in 1931, like the women were known as the original writers.
Oh, they came forward from their pseudonyms.
Yeah, in 1931, so like 20 years later.
Got it.
But
That takes guts.
Yeah.
what's odd about it is the reason people think it's more debunked is because they realized that these women put out like accounts kind of at first, like I believe it was like 2 years after they had experienced this Palace of Versailles on vacation 1901. But what was I saying? Oh, but then they like they found a more extreme version of it, or like a romanticized version of it after.
So they put out a basic story under a pseudonym and then later came forward and spiffed it up because it was popular?
That doesn't go with the timeline. I don't know if it was when they came out about it, but
down the road they changed the story to be more...
But down the road it was said that the story seemed embellished more than the original story, and that's why some people see it as a fake story.
That if it was real, they would have just stuck with the same story throughout time.
Because they're saying their original... People say... their original story didn't have the same, like, didn't seem to push towards seeing it as a supernatural event.
Got it. Okay, well, continue with what the story is.
But basically, what happened to them is they visited the Palace of Versailles on several trips in August of 1901. They traveled by train to there, and they didn't think much about the palace after touring it, so they wanted to walk through. They wanted to walk through the gardens. And when they were going through the gardens and I can't pronounce like all of these buildings' names.
That's fine.
But they were traveling and looking at all of this, but they ended up, they were supposed to go down the main avenue towards some of these structures, and they passed the wrong road and they went into a different lane, and they didn't know this, and so they saw a couple different people that they describe. So they noticed a woman shaking a white cloth out of a window. They noticed two men in kind of like, they called them gardeners. They saw the gardens as, like, they described the gardens as their original upkeep when it was like the Palace of Versailles, like Marie Antoinette and everything. So they were seeing it as like when it was kept up to look like that, and they saw all of these different people that they that were from that, looking like of that time period
while they were walking
through. And they also said that and this is all like in the book An Adventure, or their account. And so when they came to the edge of the wood, they said they saw a man seated across from the garden kiosk wearing a cloak and a large shady hat. According to Moberly, his appearance, like he basically had like a dark expression, and he had smallpox on his face. And they walked past him, and they eventually crossed a bridge and reached the gardens. And they noticed a lady sketching on the grass who looked at them. She was wearing a light summer dress, a white hat on her head, and she had lots of fair hair. And so later on, they thought that the lady that they encountered was Marie Antoinette.
What gave them the indication that any of these people were from back in time?
They didn't have appropriate looking clothing, and so later on when they were doing research, they went to see if like there was any events booked that day, or anything else going on, like maybe a fancy garden party that just had like weird attire or whatever. There was nothing going on, and they eventually returned back to this to the Palace of Versailles, and they couldn't find the original like path they took. They couldn't find like where they had walked through, and it took 2 years later for them to find. There was one map that had the bridge on it that they had described crossing. All of the other maps didn't include that bridge. So that's like part of what went into that story.
Interesting.
And they eventually were like directed to the rest of the visitors, and they toured the house.
Right.
And they didn't even speak about this until they like were kind of both leaving Versailles, or like a week after leaving Versailles, and they were. Moberly was writing a letter to her sister, and like after getting to the part of like, oh, we spent the afternoon at Versailles, they started to talk about it and realize like they started to, in their minds, believe that they had been walking through like a different time period and had kind of been like going through that, which is, if you've seen The Haunting of Hill House, it's kind of like similar, like there's all these different snippets of time together. But yeah, that's basically
Okay.
I can
my
dig it.
story.
Does
It's
the
very old.
author from the 50s credit that story for inspiration?
No, that's just what people
Okay.
who have like seen the show most like connected to. They're like,
Same-
this story is
Same with like the Winchester house. People just
Same.
have drawn similarities, but
Yeah.
it's not like a stated source of inspiration.
right.
Got it. Interesting. Okay.
I can dig it.
But yeah, when Jackson, the author, has been asked about her inspiration, she says it's the Winchester house and then like the Harlem fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Got it. Yeah, I could definitely see the Winchester aspect.
She claimed that the Harlem fire, like the feeling in that area, was the closest she had to like a supernatural experience.
Oh, so she was there herself.
She claims to be. Some people say she wasn't because they say her details about the Harlem fire are inaccurate.
Oh, interesting.
So
See, that's what I mean about not being able to trust people's stories.
Right, yeah. People all the time claim one thing or another or
I still think it's
change
neat
it.
to think, like, you see these ghostly figures as you're, like, taking this walk, and it's kind of, like, makes you feel back in time, though. I'm, like, all about that. That's so cool.
Right,
I
and that-
love old things.
And that does sound cool. And that
Yeah.
that could fit in with the whole, the residual energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the fact that they made eye contact or looked at each other, that adds the layer of intelligence, which means does that, if those people back in that time, are they seeing those two people from the future walking through? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
does it go both ways? As soon as you add the whole, and they looked at me thing, you're completely changing, the fact that you're just viewing this.
True.
And now you're stating that you are part of this, and so are they.
Yeah,
So
more
that's where
interaction than
I think it
anything.
gets a lot more difficult to be like.
yeah, if it went two ways, that would be interesting because that would mean like for them these ghosts are in a fog and it's just
Right, but there's a whole lot more stories about people seeing things from the past than there are people seeing things from the future.
True.
So if you viewing the past are also being viewed by the past as the future, then wouldn't there be many more accounts?
that's true. That's
You
weird.
know, if it did go both ways.
But do ghosts write stories?
Do ghosts write stories? They weren't ghosts
Ghost
when they were
stories about live
alive.
people.
That's true.
Yeah, that's just it. They wouldn't be dead.
That's true.
That's
That's weird.
I can
Okay.
dig it.
My cat screamed.
All right. Yeah, that's
Sorry, mine
definitely
was
a
kind of
cool
long,
idea.
but that was
That's okay. Mine's going to be short. Mine's not a story, it's a location. So as with most of this stuff, I like choosing from our local stories
I
and
almost did
buildings
that.
here. Just because there's, as you've
Very cool.
heard already on this podcast, there's a lot of old stuff
Yeah.
here in Monterey and a lot of just a lot of places and stories and people that were involved with a lot of things for a long period of time.
And you know a lot about that
And
stuff,
I know a lot
so-
about it because so this specifically is the Point Sur Light Station.
Yep.
This is the lighthouse for Big Sur, essentially. So if you're familiar with Big Sur as a region along California's Central Coast, there is a lighthouse, specifically a light station. The difference between a lighthouse and light station being a lighthouse is the building itself that has the light. A light station is the entire complex of buildings around a lighthouse. So this is a light station because it is actually an entire complex of buildings built for the purpose of supporting the lighthouse.
So it encompasses more than just the lighthouse.
Right.
All right.
Right. And so that's important because a lot of the stories don't actually have anything to do with the lighthouse itself. So this is an entire complex of buildings built on top of this huge rock that sticks out into the Pacific. So it's a, there's a very narrow spit of sand basically that connects this. So it's not an island, but it's this huge rock that sticks way out from the rest of the coastline. And they built this lighthouse and surrounding buildings on top of the rock back in 1889. And this was because for decades, ships had essentially been crashing into the rock or near the rock and sinking.
Yeah.
So, you've got this big old dark thing that sticks out into the middle of the ocean. What are you going to do? You're going to put a light on top of it.
As you do.
And so that is actually the source of many of the ghost stories, is that nothing tragic in and of itself happened at the light station. I couldn't find anything about light keepers dying or, nobody went crazy from isolation and killed people.
Yeah, no.
But
and even when we
I was
visited,
so hoping.
even when we visited there, they said that there was no.
right, we've visited there a couple times. I've been there a few times. Megan, you went the one time.
The only
And-
deaths have been shipwrecks.
Right, and so they say, that people weren't dying there. Though it was a place of extreme isolation, you could only reach the rock by boat. So there was a small dock at the base, and then you had to climb up
Yeah.
this road that was built. So it wasn't until 1930 when Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, was built that you could get there by car. So until that point, everyone is coming by boat.
Yeah. Super tight-knit community.
Right, only 3 or 4 families. You have the head light keeper, and then 3 assistant light keepers, and then the wives and children of those people, which is why you have those multiple buildings. And so a lot of the stories that we heard about when we were there and that I found online have to do with the assistant light keeper's quarters, which is this large building where all the families other than the head light keeper would have lived.
Right.
It's an unrestored building, so it still has mainly the original wood, and it's pretty dilapidated, and it's in the process of being restored. And what?
Sorry. When we visited there, that was the one that was set up as their haunted house.
Yeah.
And it was really deteriorating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of people credit restoration as something that stirs up ghosts or spirits or alters the energy that causes things to fall through the cracks. So when you have an ongoing construction project like that on such an old building, that is commonly cited as a source of a lot of activity. Yeah, exactly. If you go into the headlight keeper's house, it's completely restored and redecorated, to be era specific and things like that. But this particular building is still unrestored. But the deaths come from, there was over 15 shipwrecks in the immediate vicinity, and 1 airship, actually. So there was a Zeppelin
That's fun.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Crashed there. I forgot to write down the year, but it was back when Zeppelins were a common mode of transportation.
I was gonna say, you can kind of guess based on when Zeppelins were popular.
Right, sometime in the 30s or 40s. And it was the USS Macon, and it actually crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and 2 of the crew members died there. The head light keeper and the assistant light keeper from the lighthouse watched it happen. So it was literally right offshore. And it sank into water over 1,400 feet deep.
Jesus.
Yeah. So...
Poor Zeppelin.
Right, so a lot of things have happened around this rock over the course of history. Shipwrecks going all the way back to the early 1800s. Continuing on into the 1900s, even after there was a lighthouse, there were still ships crashing, sinking, people dying.
Yeah.
And you think about it, the closest point of land to any of these wrecks is that rock, because it sticks so far out into the water. So, if you not that ghosts need to swim ashore, but it's one of those things where it's if they headed for land, what's the closest land? this lighthouse. So there's a lot of EVPs that have been captured of.
You did air quotes just so the listening audience
I
knows.
know. I always use my hands, which does no good on a podcast.
That's why
but
I'm here.
Right.
I translate
my hand gestures. EVPs of laughter, footsteps, voices, a lot of children, a lot of women.
Ew.
That it seems, which specifically in the assistant lightkeeper's quarters and the head lightkeeper's quarters. So there's always the possibility of it being family and children of the lightkeepers.
I was gonna say I can't imagine there are many children on these shipwrecks, but who knows?
Well, yeah, there were a couple passenger ships. I mean, the Macon, of course, the two people that died were crew members, but the Macon had 80 some odd passengers on board.
Fair enough.
So it was like a commercial airliner of the time going down into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing that only 2 of them died. The rest
True.
got ashore one way or another.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so you have, I don't know, you just have a lot of energy because you're at a point of, it's such an isolated point. Now, I did not find anything. These are all things that have been reported by visitors. 1974, I believe, is when it became an automated light station. There was no longer lighthouse keepers there. It becomes a state park, and you have tours now, And so these are reports coming from tours, investigators. There's a Ghost Adventures episode of them at the light station. There's some local paranormal investigators. There's some docents down there that also dabble in paranormal investigation. They're the ones who were telling these stories. I could not find anything.
Magic is jingling away.
She's right next to my head cleaning herself.
I could.
She just bless. She just meowed.
I couldn't find anything saying that the lighthouse keepers themselves ever reported anything.
All right.
And I think personally that would have been a lot more compelling.
Someone who spent all their time there.
Right, because you are so isolated. You have to come by boat. Your supplies come by boat. It's you and 2, maybe 3 other families. And maybe they have kids, maybe they don't. So you're looking at, maybe 6 people on this rock. Maybe like 15, but like never any more than 20, I would imagine.
No, probably not.
Large families aren't getting, it's not the occupation for someone with a large family.
True.
Or you're not going to bring them with you. So it would be more compelling, I think, if there were stories of those people having incidents and things, because that would be around the time of the shipwrecks happening. That would be interesting to see how the extreme isolation played on their minds,
Yeah, I like that.
But that's not anything of what I found. But that being said, it is still considered to be one of the most haunted lighthouses in America from a variety of lists, sources that make those sorts of lists and things. Top 10 most haunted lighthouses. Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know, interesting. It's just cool because it's a spot that's close by and somewhere that I've been several times. Mm-hmm. And it is old and creepy when you're there. I mean, you're on top of this like 300-400 foot tall rock.
Important question.
In the middle of the ocean. What?
We've both been there.
Yeah.
Did you feel anything?
No.
I didn't feel anything when I was there either.
You didn't feel the ghosts?
No, like it was cute and they put on a really cute Halloween for us, but like you feel the eerie sense as you walk through kind of the unfinished buildings. But it
just feels old.
Yeah, it didn't have any weird energy to it. Like
the museum we work at feels creepier than that place.
Yeah, like I get weirder feelings.
The bear behind the glass.
Yeah, like I get weirder feelings at our park than at that one.
Yeah.
But that's neat though.
All right, next story.
That would be me. The story that I chose is more of a poltergeist considered than a ghost.
Okay.
Which sort of goes along the lines of more intelligent spirits that generally cause trouble for people living in a certain location.
Right, a poltergeist is like they're actively interacting with you and seeking out pain and problems.
Yeah, generally a poltergeist's thing is to like try and make you go away.
Right.
So they cause problems for whoever lives in this place. And I chose one of the most famous poltergeists, not Peeves from Harry Potter, but the Enfield poltergeist. Which The Conjuring 2 is sort of based around, although, of course, like, those are really dramatized and follow specifically the Warrens, and the Warrens were only there for like
way at
a
the
day
end,
or
right?
two. Yeah, towards the end of
They
any
didn't
of the
buy
reports.
into it.
No, they didn't. Well,
Not
they
as
didn't
much
buy
as some
into
of their...
it as a ghost report, but it's because they think everything is demons.
Well,
and so
that's
people
true.
were like, oh, that Ed Warren always making everything into demons is one of the things that people, like the other investigators, said about this case.
Right.
But it's from Brimstown Enfield in London, and the reports started in 1977, lasted to about 1979. So it's like fairly recent in my brain.
Yep. Because, it's only 1980.
Yeah, exactly. So it's 1977 to 1979, and my thoughts on why it was specifically during that time period is because during that time period, the mid to late 70s, were when a lot of sort of like the more classic ghost movies were popping up. So it was sort of popular to have ghost stories and popular to be haunted because... One, there was just The Exorcist had come out in like 1973, 1974, I think. And that was a big hit for the time, as well as the Amityville Horror, the original first, like, the stories, and then the first movie about it was also around the same time period.
Right.
So I'm kind of leaning towards it being like, it was part of the media of the time, and that's why it was also, like, widely reported on, because, like, it was cool to talk about ghosts then,
Well, also early 1900s was like spiritualism, so that means
yeah,
the
for
people
sure.
of like the 70s, either their parents or grandparents grew up with spiritualism.
For sure, there's
Yeah.
spiritualism and seances and all of
Yeah.
that. But I think
Interesting.
it's just like ghosts and possession and things were a big resurgence in the media
Yeah.
during specifically the 70s.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it got sort of a lot of note for the time, especially in London, because most of the things were happening in America.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe London wanted their own, who knows?
So for this family to come forward, that was a big deal.
True.
For where they were.
Yeah, it's the Hodgson family. Hodgson.
Hodgsons.
Hodgson?
A Hodgsons.
Hodgson. Yeah, them.
Hodgsons.
It was a single mother and 4 children that were in what was called a council house in London, which were very
okay.
popular in the 60s and 70s. It's sort of like really cramped apartment buildings for lower income people.
Yeah.
They're still around today, too. But the focus were on specifically 2 of the children, Margaret and Janet. They were like 11 and 13 at the time, I think. And they started reporting, at first, mostly just, like, furniture moving and hearing knocks. And I guess they had called in their mother, because the mother was like, go to bed. And they're like, no, our chest of drawers is moving. But, in a more British accent than what I'm speaking in.
No,
and so
Mom.
yeah. No, Mummy! I'm so sorry to any listeners. But yeah, they're like, no, Mom, our closet keeps shaking, essentially. Our wardrobe keeps shaking. And so she came in and she also saw it. And then she called the police after, like, it kept going on, apparently. And sort of from there, it expanded into a lot of things, from first just claims of things moving and being thrown around to claims of hearing voices and claims of hearing knocking, and then of, like, the children themselves levitating into the air, and the children, one specifically, Janet, like, having one of the ghosts speak through her, and, like, all of that. And so it, like, rose exponentially from just, like, things are weird in the house, and that's why because at first they called the police. They brought the police in after hearing all these knockings in the walls and seeing things move, because they're like, maybe someone's coming in messing with our stuff, who knows? And, I compiled sort of evidence into 2 lists.
Okay.
The first is the list that I will read to you, and it is in favor of the Enfield poltergeist being real. Because I thought that would be more fun to lead off with.
Yep.
So, things that happened that sort of point to it possibly being real is a police constable that was called supposedly signed an affidavit that she saw a chair wobble and slide across the room. So, like...
Police vouching.
an authority, yeah. There were said to be, in the span of, like, 18 months, more than 30 witnesses that saw moving furniture and objects being thrown.
How many friends are they having come over?
Not friends, like investigators.
Okay.
After the initial police report, like the next 18 months became all about having investigators come to see either like prove it or speak with the girls, or reporters from like the Daily Mail, things like that. Although the Daily Mail is not credible because it's basically a tabloid and has been for a time. So yeah, more than 30 people apparently saw these things and heard disembodied voices. The Society for Psychical Research members, they believed it to be genuine, although one of the investigators they sent, Guy Lyon Playfair, wrote a book about it in 1980 called This House is Haunted, The True Story of a Poltergeist. And he maintained that it was all very genuine, although he still like questioned if the girls were exaggerating and playing tricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to trust the kids.
For sure.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah, exactly. There are pictures of one of the girls, Janet, who appears to be levitating.
I've seen that picture. It looks like she's jumping on the bed.
That's exactly what I thought, but some people like really hold strong to the fact that she seems upset about it. I don't know.
If the bed wasn't there,
I know. There's 2 beds in the frames. There's like 2 or 3 pictures, I think, that are widely known for it, and it's the girl like up, and she's sort of between the 2 beds, but it's sort of, to me, clear that she's jumping from one bed to another.
The next bed, yeah.
But people hold that as evidence,
Okay.
and then another thing that people hold as evidence is that Janet, the 11-year-old, seemed to be speaking in the voice of a gruff old man who is said to have died in the house. And I actually brought up a little bit of an audio clip for us to play for just a moment.
Right, because that was the thing with this one, was mass interviews, like more so than any case.
Yeah.
Other than maybe Amityville.
Yeah, true.
Because that one
Amityville didn't have nearly as many like witnesses, though. There were a lot of people that came in after the fact and interviewed the family, but not while they're in the house and quote unquote while it was happening.
Got it.
So I'm gonna play a little clip of the little girl speaking in a creepy voice.
Hello, Mr. Playfair. Mum isn't sleeping, I'm talking.
So those kinds of voices.
Sounds like the kid from The Shining if he was British.
Right.
Basically. Well, and so there you go right there. Little kids, they can make their voices deep and distorted.
I have been doing stupid voices all of my life, and
Still a creepy voice one way or the other.
I was gonna say, maybe to some people, they don't want to believe that, like, a normal 11-year-old girl would do a creepy voice and say these creepy things, and that's evidence to them. It's like, no, she's so normal, blah, blah, blah. But, so a lot of people hold the fact that she was speaking in this gruff voice to be evidence. And now to evidence of a hoax, which is a slightly longer list.
Okay.
Evidence towards the host is when their little home was being filled with investigators coming in and out. One or many had set up cameras, and one of the cameras caught Janet, the youngest, who was claiming to have voices come out of her, bending spoons and attempting to bend an iron bar in the kitchen to blame it on a poltergeist. Janet banged a broom handle on the ceiling and hid an investigator's tape recorder. There was like an interview with one of the investigators calling it a hoax that said one of Janet's voices, Bill, displayed a habit of changing subjects suddenly, just like Janet. And then Janet and Margaret themselves admitted to pranking reporters, although the 2 reporters that they admitted it to asked them to take it back. So a lot of other investigators heard that and started making fun of those reporters for being so gullible. Things like that. They sent an American magician, Milburn Christopher, to investigate, and all he found was strange antics because of Janet. Mostly it's Janet that they're blaming.
Yeah, so, I mean, I didn't buy into this one beforehand.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. But the fact that there's so much media evidence, quote unquote, that there's pictures and audio and things, it's stuff that people never really thought, Megan, are you eating the paw of the cat? No. Megan's possessed.
She keeps sticking out her little tongue.
Oh.
Sorry.
But yeah, so people hadn't really thought to do much documenting with media about hauntings and poltergeists, so the fact that this one had so much, like, evidence is what people really, why they believe in it. That's interesting. And my favorite part of the investigation is that they sent a ventriloquist.
Oh.
They sent ventriloquist Ray Allen, who concluded upon visit that the quote-unquote male voices that Janet were doing were just vocal tricks. Like, so that sort of settled it once and for all. People still believe that there's like, no way, an 11-year-old girl to do that. But I did a lot of creepy voices when I was a kid, so... Talk to an 11-year-old sometime and ask them to do a creepy voice. Or send a ventriloquist to your house, you never know. In one interview, that sort of like was the nail in the coffin, was the girls were asked, how does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist? And Janet said, it's not haunted. And then Margaret said, shut up.
Oh, wow.
Which is bypassed a lot in a lot of the Daily Mail articles, believe it or not. And then finally, as an adult, Janet admitted to faking about quote-unquote 2% of the phenomena, although evidence points more to 100%.
2%.
Yeah. And she was like, I faked some of it, basically. But I think her admitting that she faked some of it sort of can cast doubt on everything.
Yeah.
And so that's my story of the Enfield poltergeist.
Okay.
And I think it would have been like this fun phenomena while it was going on to be like, oh, what's happening in Enfield with the poltergeist? But after the fact, it's just so obvious that it was a hoax. But it's still really fun to listen to the creepy recordings and to see the weird pictures that everybody took and to read up on it. So that's my ghost story for the day.
I buy more into like the story from the first Conjuring, you know, the Perron family.
Yeah.
You know, in where were they? New Hampshire, Connecticut, something like that.
Yeah.
So I buy more into that one when you look into the original details. Again, of course, the film embellishes, but not to say that one didn't have, you know, bits or all of it that were faked, but it's much more believable by my standards.
I think so too, but to this day, so many people still like vehemently believe in the Enfield poltergeist.
Yeah.
But I mean, to this day, people still believe in the Amityville horror, and that was like debunked to be a hoax a million years ago. But people are like, no, ghosts though.
See, for me, the parents they didn't really want to talk about it.
Not so much. There's not a lot of interviews with the mom.
They were just kind of like, no, no.
There's a lot of people talk to Janet though, and Janet had a lot to say, a lot to do.
Exactly.
So
okay, well,
and, from the mouths of babes, it's not always the truth.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's crazy.
Yeah. Well,
so that's the end of our researched ghost stories.
Right. So do we want to share a little bit about ourselves? We'll keep it short. We've been talking a while, but
that's true. I babble.
Megan,
you guys go.
We go?
Yeah.
Okay.
We go.
You don't want to go by the same order?
Nah.
Okay.
No. I went first, then Megan went first. Now you go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I mean, so
tell me about your ghosts, Saren.
I know,
Tell me
right?
about your
Have you ever had
ghosts.
ghost stories?
So, I what?
What?
You were about to
Go
say
ahead.
something. I don't have anything specifically that like jumps out like hands down 100%. I don't care if you guys believe me or not. I know this to be true. I don't have anything like that. But why are you making faces?
I'm not. I'm just thinking.
But let's see. There was a couple things. So I got to be part of a paranormal investigation of the Robert Louis Stevenson house here in Monterey, which
is dope.
Right, yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was definitely not something that I get to do on a normal day of work.
Yeah.
But there was a group that had gotten a permit and was being allowed in, and there had to be a staff member with them, you know, in the...
You got to be that staff
And I got to be that guy. So, the building is from the 1840s. It's called the Robert Louis Stevenson House, but it really has nothing to do with Robert Louis Stevenson. Other than a very small fraction of its history. It was actually, for the majority of its history, it was a hotel called the French Hotel. And it was I think the second or third hotel in Monterey. So it was kind of a big deal at the time, mid-1800s. But Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, before he was a well-known author, as a young man, he stayed in this hotel. He lived there for about 3 or 4 months. Hence why it bears his name today, and it's filled with artifacts from his life. That's how the museum is displayed. But the building itself, the French Hotel, was owned by a Swiss-French family who emigrated to America, the Girardins. And in 1879, which was the same year that Stevenson stayed, he was here like August through November, December, something like that. in that summer of 1879, the owner and proprietor of the hotel died of typhoid. His wife, Manuela, took over the operations of the building, and her two granddaughters fell sick with typhoid fever in December of 1879.
Bummer.
And she worked night and day to nurse them back to health. She contracted typhoid, died December 21st, 1879. But the kids survived, but she died before she knew that. So the common story with the building is that, the upstairs used to be open to the public. It's closed because it really needs renovations really bad. But it used to be open and decorated as the children's nursery. And from time to time, people would see a lady in black in that room in the chair, or like pacing, or like she was trying to take care of the children, or looking out the window upstairs, things like that. But anyway, this investigation that we did, they only had clearance to stay downstairs. I did not get to take them upstairs.
Too many ghosts.
And right, too many ghosts upstairs. They stood near the stairwell and like held their recorders up there, and that was actually so there. They did a couple tricks with the flashlights. You let the flashlight in a place and you twist it so that the connection is severed, which means if it lights up, something interfered between the battery and the metal plate that the batteries are supposed to touch. Something used their energy to draw the bridge and turn on the light. That happened twice with two of their flashlights. They did several EVP sessions, and there was a couple of things that they claimed were words that I didn't buy into, but there was one that was, in my opinion, pretty clear. It was near the staircase, and they asked, just to any spirits out there, have you been there long? And there was this voice on the playback that sounded like it said, just passing through. Really faintly. And like
neat.
Slowly, like, just passing through. Very nonchalant.
That's fun.
And so that was the only one from what they did that I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool, and that makes sense. It was a hotel, people coming and going. It was a carriage repair shop.
People passing through.
Exactly,
It's a
people
museum
passing
now.
through. Right, and they tried to reach out to Robert Louis Stevenson, and I'm like, he
Not
would,
him.
even if Robert Louis Stevenson's ghost was a thing, it would not be here.
No, I think it'd be in Samoa.
It'd be in Samoa, where he's buried, where his home was, where his family, that he spent time with. He was here for such a short period of time. It was not an overly meaningful part of his life by comparison.
And I've spent a lot of time in there, especially like recently when we've had events and stuff. And personally for myself, and I've been upstairs, I haven't seen anything. There was once that I felt a really weird energy there when I was having to lock up. And basically it was just this feeling of, how there's the apartment connected to the building.
Yeah.
So there's an add-on of an apartment to that building, so that way I think it's like a worker one for maintenance or something, can live there. Sometimes the state parks, they get to live in historic buildings. But for me, that window?
Yeah, at the top of the stairs.
Well, so like there's the wall for the apartment, and then there's one wall for the side of like Stevenson house, and then it goes into the front, and there's like one window up there.
Yeah, from the front garden.
There was one day I was leaving, and there was like a voice inside my head that like when I was near that window, something felt wrong, like because that's near the back gate part where you get the key to go inside, and something just kept telling me not to look in the upstairs window, like that window right there, and I don't know what it was, but that was the only time I felt something negative.
Did you look?
No, I didn't.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so that investigation was cool. Other than that, there was. I'll condense the story to keep it short, but in my dorm room.
I forgot about this.
Yeah, in my dorm room, which I was there, but I was not the one to which these things were happening. In my dorm room, 6 years ago, 5, something like that.
About
5 years ago, I had gone camping in Big Sur with my girlfriend at the time, and we had stayed in the campgrounds, hiked to a spot where it talked about there's this little cabin and a little plaque that talks about it being an old homestead of some of the, the first white families moving into Big Sur and stuff, and that there was a burial ground nearby for Native Americans that had died there. Excuse me. And some of the family members were died there. So just basically like an unmarked cemetery nearby where there's multiple Native Americans and early settlers buried, because that family, you read the plaque, they had like 12 children and like 9 of them died of horrible diseases or accidents.
Right for the time,
yeah. So just your typical stuff where it's like death was just part of everyday life. Thought nothing of it, moved on, you know. Then we go home that day, because that was we only did the one night. And in my dorm room, I was doing homework, but she was sleeping. You know, it's like 1 a.m. You know, I'm always up that late. But she wakes up, like, screaming and freaking out. Okay, you know, people have nightmares, whatever. But while awake, she was maintaining that there were people in like a half circle around the bed, staring and yelling and pointing at her. Okay? Even when I, like, came over, and, you know, she was like...
And you were one of the ones staring and yelling and
I
pointing.
know, right? And, you know, she was like, you don't see them, and she was very freaked out. And then she, a minute or two later, said that there was someone standing in the middle of the dorm room with no head.
Ew.
Okay? Yeah. And she was just, like, up against the wall crying, and I ran across the room because, of course, the light switches are way on the other end of the dorm room. I didn't have dorm mates or anything. It was a room meant for 3 people. I was in there alone. I run across, flip the light on. Okay? And she said that made it disappear. The only thing that I experienced, other than just witnessing her terror for probably about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe my brain says it was 5 minutes. Maybe it was only 2. I don't know. A period of time.
Uh-huh.
The only thing that I experienced is that right when I flipped the lights on, there was a knock against the door of the dorm room, which is right next to where the light switches are. And, you know, there was a couple guys in the hall that frequently would, middle of the night, knock on each other's doors and run, you know, ding-dong ditch.
College.
Yeah. But I was standing right there. So, you know, always by the time you get to the door and open it and look, and you're like, oh, they're gone. You know, this time I heard the knock. It's like 1:30 or whatever. I immediately opened the door, and there's nobody there. So that was the only thing that I witnessed, was that's the only thing that I know for sure happened, is that someone knocked on the door, I opened the door, there was nobody there.
Spooky, scary skeletons.
Right.
All right.
And I don't know that she would have been lying per se. I think she definitely had a nightmare, but then waking up and then having visuals continue for as long as they did, I find interesting, you know, and very creepy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Spooky story.
Yeah.
Spooky college dorm room story.
Yeah. Haunted dorm room. Well, in my dorm room, just super quick, dorm room was an old military barracks from World War I, World War II era.
Yeah.
So, you know, converted.
Historical buildings.
Yep.
With their historical ghosts.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that would have stayed there would have gone overseas and possibly died in the Pacific Theater in Vietnam and all that good stuff. So,
Sam,
right.
do you have one?
Do I have a ghost story?
Yeah.
this was your idea to share, so
I
you
know,
gotta
but
have
I'm the
something.
most skeptical. But,
I know. Well,
I was trying to think of like.
I was pretty
ghost...
skeptical too, but
I know.
you can say something that may or may not.
I was gonna say I have kind of a ghost story, in the fact that why do you always point it at me when I'm speaking?
I'm trying to increase our audio quality.
I kind of have a ghost story. I was trying to think of things that happened, like, sort of recently, like if I had recently, with my current frame of mind, experienced anything spiritual. And not necessarily, my old house was a large 2-story house that had lots of constant, like, creaks and knocks and things like that, and for a time, I was convinced there was, like, a strange knocking on the wall outside of my bedroom, because there was just hallway outside of my bedroom, and not a hallway that anyone would go down except for me on my way to my bedroom, because I was the last bedroom in that hallway.
It was the possum, wasn't it?
Maybe. But I'm like, that house was so noisy and old and creaky that I can't attribute anything spiritual to it. So I tried to think further back to any ghost stories from, like, my childhood.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily have ghost stories that I remember, but I can tell you that my mother, my grandma, and all of my aunts were convinced that I was one of those children that could see ghosts.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to tell you about that.
Would you talk to empty rooms and things?
I had a very, very, very specific imaginary friend, which I still consider my imaginary friend, but everybody else in my family, it's sort of like you, Megan, how you're like, a lot of the people in my family are very intuitive and very empathic. My mom has always maintained that the women in our family have some sort of psychic ability, and specifically for, like, spiritualism type things, where we can sort of see ghosts or have premonitions, things like that. I'm not of that mindset, but all the women in my family are.
Got it. So you say imaginary friend, and they said you had a ghost attached to you.
Yeah, but I mean, I can see their thing, like, why they would think that, because I'm like, oh, kids have imaginary friends, they come up with weird details for their imaginary friends.
Right,
but
which
the
is normal.
details I came up with were very, like, realistic and specific.
Okay.
So that's why they're like, no, Sam sees ghosts.
Well, yeah, I think my
There's, like,
imaginary
a
friend
ghost
is-
that haunts this house, and Sam knows their life story.
Got it.
But I don't know. I never considered it a ghost or anything, or that I was speaking to somebody dead, but because as an adult, my brain is sort of a very logical thing where it can be creative and come up with stories, but it's always, like, within the realms of reality, generally. So I think that's just how I was as a kid, you know, where I'm like,
Right.
I'll come up with a life story of this person, but it's not going to be some, like, fantastical beast that I'm friends with, but it's going to be, like, a little girl with a story sort of similar to mine.
Ah, and it was.
Yeah,
a little girl?
it was a little girl, but she was apparently from, like, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Her name was Sarah. She had red hair. She had a barn. At the time, I lived in a little ranch in the SoCal desert. There was a barn on the land that used to be there. She used to hang out there with the horses, and this and that. I knew details about her entire family, and I would talk to her like she was right next to me, or I'd be like, oh yeah, she's right across the room, right there, like next to one of the family members, and they'd all be freaked out about it and be like, oh, and, like, it went on a long time is also a thing. Like, usually imaginary friends come and go, so they're like, oh, Sam sees
This was years?
this, like, years, yeah.
Okay.
Like, probably two years at least.
From ages what to what? Sorry, I'm curious.
No, it's I know, I've never told
Yeah,
the story
yeah.
very much, because I don't put much stock in it, but other people do, so it's fun. I want to say, how long did I live in that house? I lived there from ages, like, 2 to 11, and I want to say it was from, like, age, like, 6 to 7, 6 to 8, maybe.
Okay.
Because I do remember
Getting to
sort
the,
of
the
being
upper
that
end
kid.
of having an imaginary friend.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
as
I
well.
remember, because knowing brains like I do, you don't necessarily you can't retain memories from ages 5 or before.
Yeah.
When people say that they remember something from when they were 3 and they remember being 3 or 4, they're lying. It's not true. They
They're
remember
remembering
someone
a
telling
story
them
or a
yeah.
photograph that they've
You-
personified.
You cannot
Yeah.
necessarily recall memories from before age 5. Age 5 is usually, like, the standard limit of when you can start creating memories that you can recall.
Well, that makes me feel way better because I don't remember shit.
Yeah.
I don't
Like-
remember a lot of my childhood, honestly.
I
But I do remember, like, one Christmas, or, like, near the holiday time, maybe, where we had my great aunt over and my grandma over, and we're all having dinner. And it was just after dinner, we're all hanging out in the family room, and my mom loves to talk and likes to create fun stories and spectacles, and was like, oh, Sam sees ghosts, tell them about your friend Sarah. And so I go on my spiel, tell them about my friend Sarah. We've been friends for a while now, but she's from another time. She's, like, 2 years older than me, something like that, whatever.
But when they say
And then-
ghost, you're not like, she's not a ghost. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they ever said ghost.
Yeah.
But, like, later on, my mom would be like, remember when you used to talk to that ghost? But, like, at the time, they treated me like it was very real. Like, I had a very real, invisible friend. But the one memory that I do have of this time in my life where I was seeing this imaginary friend or ghost or what have you was that time where we had a couple of family members over, and it was after dinner, and I'm going on my spiel because my mom's like, tell them about Sarah. And I go and I tell them about Sarah, and then I'm like, and she's holding your hand right now, because my grandma had her hand, like, resting with her palm up on one of the armrests. And so I was like, oh yeah, she's holding your hand. And my grandma goes, ah! And I'm like, that's rude. It's like a little kid.
That's pretty
And
funny.
that's the only memory that I, like, properly have of that sort of period of, like,
Describing
freaking out
her.
my grandma.
Right.
Like, after going on the spiel of, like, all these details that I supposedly knew about this little girl.
Interesting.
And so my whole family was very convinced that I could see ghosts, and my mom was already very much of the mindset of, like, we're all psychics, all the women in our family are psychics, this and that. So that is my personal ghost story.
Yeah, that's pretty good, because that is pretty detailed. You can easily see it go either way. I mean, I don't remember my imaginary friend, and I guess my mom said that I had one for an extremely short period of time, like very short period of time. It was an octopus.
Precious.
I don't even think it had a
Oh,
name.
Aaron.
Yeah, it was just
I don't know.
I'm sorry, that's
You know.
cute.
The only, like, weird detail
from
of
like
my imaginary
3 to
friend...
4 years old,
Your
you know.
octopus.
Yeah.
It was, like, the only weird detail I think that I had, because, like, anyone can come up with, like, details of, like, oh, yeah, she had red hair, blah, 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 just making up a person. But I was like, she died in a fire.
Oh,
Was my thing. She died in a fire.
got it. So to you,
And
she
then it's
was
kind of-
dead. Well,
yeah.
because she was from the 1800s.
Mine
I was
Yeah.
like, she's dead,
Monster.
but she's still here talking to me. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know
Got
about ghosts, really.
My
Right.
imaginary friend was a monster.
Monster.
I just thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I liked it.
But yeah, so that's my ghost story of the little girl
Wow.
that died in a fire that spoke to me as a
In
child.
Lancaster.
I think
Down in Lancaster.
I think you had a friend ghost
My friend ghost.
personally,
That's fair.
because I
You can
think
that.
I think kids' minds are too. Not that you weren't a great kid, but I think kids' minds are too like our what is it called?
Tap your forehead.
I'm tapping my forehead.
that thing in there.
Yeah, that thing in there.
That bit.
Our,
What, you-
our
You don't think that they could come up with that kind of detail at that
No,
age?
I think they could. I think it's the their attention spans are too quick and too small to hold on to something for the like period of 2 years.
That's true.
You know, because with kids, like what their wants and needs are like very quickly changing
Oh, yeah.
in
Kids'
terms of
interests fluctuate within the day.
like so quick. And
Well, you
so
don't-
that's why I just find it interesting that it's like a young person
It
held
lasted a
on
while.
to a friend or like that description.
Yeah.
And also if it did come from your brain, like then you would probably have to sit there and think of like the details for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you're just like, yeah, she does this and is like this and she has these clothes and she's from this time and like for that long, and it was always, and like from what it sounds like with your parents, like it was pretty consistent.
Yeah.
I
stuck
think
with
you had
my
a friend
story.
ghost.
I stuck with my story pretty hard.
Do you
but I
remember
mean,
when
like,
it
I
ended?
could-
Or
Not
have you
really.
been told like the last time?
The last time that I talked about Sarah, no, I don't remember that at all.
Well, I
I
feel-
think the only thing that's weird about it is the fact that I'm like, oh yeah, she died.
Yeah.
And I didn't think twice about the fact she was like my friend there talking to me. But I was like, she died. It's fine.
In a fire.
She's here now.
Right.
Like, I don't think as a kid I thought about it, but I'm sure to my parents it was freaky.
Yeah, for sure.
That's funny.
Okay, you're up.
I'm up.
Your turn, your
You,
ghost.
you can say as little or as much as you want. I don't care.
So
I
mine's
babble.
difficult because I've had a lot of, I guess what you could call encounters or instances, but I've never seen a ghost.
Okay.
I've felt, or from what I know, I've never seen a ghost. I've felt energies, and I've felt things that feel weird or off. And I've had things tell me stuff, and like I had weird occurrences or patterns. Like I lived in the dorms too, not the same dorm as Aaron. You were in Tortuga, I think. I was in a dorm called Willett Hall, and there was a couple people I found out later.
Yours is older.
Mine was older than yours. Mine was from what was called like Residential Hall like 1 or whatever. Like it was a group of buildings that was the one, and I think Tortuga was part of like Residential Group 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
For freshmen.
Yeah, mine was not for freshmen.
And so for me, this occurrence could have been just from like, it was the start of something new, and it was the start of my college, and like it was my first month in the dorms.
Stress-induced
It could have been
visions.
stress, but like the second or third week or something like that in the dorms. And both my roommates got freaked out in the dorms sometimes too. Like they said at night, like they could see a shadow on the ceiling. But there was, for like a week straight, I woke up around the same time, around 3 o'clock every single night for like a week. It only lasted like a week, but I woke up around like 3 o'clock, 3:05, 3:00, like early 3 a.m. for every single night, like several nights in a row. And I would just be staring at the ceiling, at this kind of like shadow portion of the ceiling. And it was like where the light was, it casted a shadow. The light wasn't on. It's just like the way the light fixture was set up. It kind of casted a shadow. So it honestly was probably just like middle of the night stress, like whatever. But it was kind of odd that happened.
And your roommate said they would see that dark spot as well.
Well, they, like, I could never tell if they were... I could tell JoJo was close enough to me so I could tell if she was awake or not, but I could never tell if Lily was because she was like kind of around the corner from me. Our room was small, but it was still like I couldn't see if Lily was awake or not. So there would be times where they were like, yeah, like I woke up from a nightmare and like, and I felt this or I saw this for a while, and I'd be like, oh, okay. But yeah, so I had that. But the closest I could say to like what felt supernatural or what felt like something weird is throughout our childhood, because we stayed from the ages of like 1 to 3 with me, we moved around quite a bit. I was born here in Monterey, but we moved to Modesto when I was really young, and my sister was born in Modesto, and then we lived in apartments until we moved into our house when I was about 3 or 4 and my mom started her business. But from 3/4 all the way up to 18 living in that house, there were, not always, but there were times I felt strange feelings in there. And Allison thought our house was haunted. She would say she would see things in her teen years. But for me, I never thought the house was haunted. It almost felt like stuff would pass through the house, if that would make sense. Like, not always, but there would be times that, like, Allison thought she saw something, or I thought I was feeling something kind of weird. So it felt like, I don't know, I don't think it's haunted, and I don't think there was ever really spirits, but there was one night, what?
Sorry, I just remembered something.
What?
From my old apartment. Keep going.
I know that story.
If we have time, I'll throw another story in. But
is that when I did something?
No. Way before then. Just keep going.
Oh yeah.
Just keep talking.
I'm surprised you didn't talk about your apartment.
I know. I forgot.
Your apartment's.
I know that was a weird apartment. Just finish your
anyways,
story.
Keep going. With my. So there was one night, and Allison said there was one night this happened to her too, but she never told me when, and Allison's my sister. But I had sleep paralysis because I had a nightmare that I was in hell, but it was just like, it was this small room of like red coals, and I was stuck on the red coals and I couldn't move, so I was like dying and kind of decaying, but I couldn't move, and I was just stuck on those burning coals in that position, like on my side. And I just kept hearing like kind of laughter, and it was just like this dark red room, and like that's just what I remember. But I woke up and I had sleep paralysis, and I know sleep paralysis, like you can sometimes see like shadow figures or whatever. So I don't think this was a demon. It's just my closest to seeing a ghost or seeing a demon was that I had this nightmare and the sleep paralysis, and when I woke up I thought I was seeing this kind of like, I don't know, it was just like I couldn't move, I felt paralyzed, and I thought I was seeing a kind of dark figure in my room. But I wasn't. I'm pretty sure I wasn't. I don't think I was. But...
Small food for thought. Sleep paralysis usually occurs when you're lying flat on your back, not on your side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't.
So I was on your side.
I wasn't sleeping on
ghosts.
my side.
No, I'm kidding.
It was in the nightmare. I was on my side, like in the coals, but I was sleeping on my back that night. I woke up, and when I could finally move, I sat up.
Okay.
And I was like shaking there because it was one of the.
Well, yeah, it's here.
Yeah, it was gonna.
I've had sleep paralysis twice before, and it's scary.
I've had it.
I see why people would think.
Well, this is also before I went through like some of my trauma that could have induced my nightmares. So this is like a nightmare I had before I started having regular nightmares, if that makes sense. So it wasn't induced by like a stress or whatever. I just think that whatever was happening at the time. So I don't think our house was haunted, but it did sometimes feel like a weird feeling was passing through. But again, that could be attributed to a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've-
sleep paralysis is crazy though. Like the two
Yeah.
times that I had it, I swear something crawled from my feet up onto my chest and was like pressing on me.
Yeah, like that's the thing.
And then
When you're in
finally I
sleep
could move, and I was
paralysis,
like,
you just
oh
don't
my
know.
gosh.
So that's more of a real
So,
thing, but
it's so
in the
real.
time it felt like a demon was like
Right, yeah.
getting me. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had sleep paralysis 3 times, twice in the house where I grew up, and then the last time was in my dorms. And
I had it twice in one night. It was awful.
oh wow,
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Right?
one time, the first time I thought I saw something, the second time I thought I heard something, and the third time I thought I felt something.
There
So
you go. You got all
all
3.
three emotions that
Yeah.
or senses that
Yeah.
can be induced by sleep
Now
paralysis.
tell us about your old apartment, man.
Which was totally haunted.
Yeah, so
I spent a lot of nights in that apartment. I don't know.
I think it was. Aaron and I used to have the same dream of the same woman.
Oh, well then.
that's true.
I don't dream, so never
That's
mind.
true. There
I'm
were-
not a good source.
there was-
I forgot there was once that
Yeah,
like
there was 2 nights.
when you and I were first stating that we both had the same dream of the same woman smiling at us.
I came out and I was like, man, I had this weird dream last night, and I like described it. And she was like, oh, what?
I was like, I have been having that dream like a couple nights ago. And he was just like, what? And I described the woman, and he was like, yeah, that's the woman I saw.
Yeah, it was an older
was weird.
lady.
Because I wish we said this one first instead of all the other stuff. But for me, in that dream, like I was having a normal dream, and it cut in the middle, and it was just that woman, and she was laughing at me. And I couldn't figure out why, and it was weird, and I felt uncomfortable when I woke up. So it
For
was
me,
weird when
it
you
wa-
told me that.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't even a dream. It was just the image of this old lady laughing.
Yeah.
Like,
Gross.
just laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I woke up and I'm like, what the? As I do.
yeah.
A lot of people.
No, but
yeah.
that apartment, so after...
Again, still on the old military.
Right, so
area.
after leaving the dorms, moved
It
into...
was more military housing that
Yeah.
was built after the fact, though.
Right,
Yeah,
it was
it was.
it was a proper apartment, but it was still school housing. So the campus is a converted military base. So 3 miles off main campus, there was what was the family housing. So the dorms, the freshman dorms and the sophomore dorms are what used to be the barracks. Then the family housing is what became the upperclassmen optional housing, called East Campus. And they were duplexes. They were nice. They were large. You had the whole top floor to yourself, and then another 3 students had the whole bottom floor, and then there was a 2-car garage. You each got half. Pretty good deal, actually.
Yep.
As far as college housing goes. So it was like living in a house. So we had the upstairs. It was me and Travis and initially Senia, and then we had later Thomas. So the majority of our YouTube videos are from that apartment.
Yeah.
You'll remember.
The couches in East Campus are the background of many of a Nerds versus Retro.
Right,
Nerd
that
Hunters versus
that's
Retro.
where retro started. That's where we did a bunch of originals. That's where a lot of our first, when we made the transition into doing a lot of video game content and not as many skits. That was that apartment. And I didn't have as many things, but Travis would say he would see stuff in the hallway. There was this weird hallway. It was just a weirdly designed hallway.
It was.
It was always dark, even when the light was on. Like, even when the light is on, it was still just a dark hallway. It was just weird.
There were a few times where, when I would come to visit and I would stay on the couch in the living room, I would want to go through the hallway to the bathroom, but not want to wake anyone in the bedrooms up, so I wouldn't turn the light on, and it was pitch black and horrifying.
It's like the
Like, it was-
darkest space for
it's-
no reason. Even
It just sucks the light out of everything. It was
yep.
crazy.
That hallway just never had light
Spooky scary.
permeate through very well. And that hallway was always where people that would come over would feel weird or say they saw things. So multiple friends, and then Travis and Z as well, would see, corner of the eye, like someone was passing from one door to the next, usually coming out of the one bedroom and then into the hallway, and then going past the wall. And past that wall was the bedroom, my bedroom, and the bathroom. So, from where you are, you couldn't see if they were going, but always coming out of the one room and somewhere else. And multiple people described this to me. Friends that were visiting from out of town, other students that would come over to hang out would describe this. 3 or 4 people over the 3 years that I lived there.
Yeah.
And then the 2 out of the 3 of us that did live there, me being the one that just wasn't seeing it, until one time we're playing cards or something at the kitchen table. Now the corner of my eye, I see something go by in the hallway there. And that was the other thing. That hallway was visible from almost anywhere in the apartment. No matter what room you were in, you had a line of sight to that hallway.
Especially sitting at the kitchen table, you can look right down the hallway.
Whether you're in the kitchen, the laundry room, or the living room, or any of the bedrooms, you could see that hallway where it was always dark. It was like the focal point of the entire apartment. It's really weird now that you think about it that way. And I saw the corner of my eye, thought I saw something move, and I look. There's nothing there. And then, the other person sitting at the table says, "Wait, you saw that?" Because just the way I reacted made them think, And they're like, it's like something just went by. Mm. And I can't remember who's sitting at the table with me.
You said it was Senior when you last told me.
I think it was. It most likely was. Yeah.
It was somebody who was like,
yeah.
You saw that too.
Yeah, but Alex would see stuff, just other people that would visit. But and then there was also, of course, we did have a cat. But before we had a cat, we didn't get a cat until we'd been there for a while. Before we had a cat,
I feel like you'd know if it was Charlie though.
Well, and he, if you remember Charlie, he was a
little kitty,
big boy,
little kitty.
Not moving very fast and not really jumping on things.
No.
So there were times where we'd come home and things would be on the ground, knocked off of the top of bookshelves or knickknacks and things. Mm-hmm. There was one time that all 3 of us were home. I was in my room. They were in their room. There was a loud boom, and then a painting fell off the wall. Oh. And we each ran out of our rooms to go check on the other because we both thought that the sound came from the other room. Uh-huh. And then we were like, no. And there's no explanation of where that just boom. And I mean, it sounded like something just slammed into the wall of the house.
Crazy.
And something fell. Again, it was during a thunderstorm, but it sounded like thunder from within the apartment. So I see that face.
I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah.
That's a neat story.
There was once when we were moving out, and I don't know what it was because I had only I don't know. Anyways, I had almost everything really packed up, and we had cleaned most of the apartment, and I think it was only 8 or 9 o'clock, and Aaron and I were talking
in the morning or in the evening.
Evening.
Okay.
And we were talking, and I think we were sitting on the floor because we were having to figure a couple things out. We were sitting on the floor of your
boxes
empty,
of stuff. Yeah,
your empty living room. And all of a sudden, I just looked at you, and I don't know what came over me. I didn't feel really in control in that moment, but I just looked at him and I told him we need to leave. And he was like, what? And I'm like, I don't know why, but we need to leave right now. And he was like, okay. And then we left, and I think we went to the new apartment that we were moving into. But I don't know. That was my one. Other than the nightmare dream thing, that was my one really weird experience. And Aaron's old apartment was just having this overcoming feeling of we're not supposed to be here, and I don't know why.
Yeah. Gotta get out.
Yeah, I don't know why we needed to, but just all of a sudden, something told me I was we have to. We're not supposed to be here, and I don't know why.
And what I think again with a place like that, this is a place that was built in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it was occupied by hundreds of soldiers and later hundreds of students.
Yeah.
It was not a place that anyone was ever able to really call home because everyone...
It's always temporary housing, especially with military
exactly.
And
so
students.
Just the energy and just the sheer amount of people and things always coming and going, and never settling.
It's like a hotel.
Exactly.
You can't ever feel very at home in a hotel.
And look at how many what percent of haunted places on this planet are hotels,
I know, I was going to talk about
or
the Queen Mary
prisons.
today. Prisons.
So I think there's a lot to say about locations that have so much coming and going and lack of stability.
I don't think C-Soon-B is demon haunted, but I do think there is some residual stuff.
No, I don't think it was a ghost.
Demons in the trash whale?
Yeah. I never felt
the mammoth.
The
trash
mammoth. Sorry.
That thing is demonic in and of itself.
I never felt
beautiful.
like we were gonna be attacked or anything at that apartment. There was just stuff
No.
that I felt like uncomfortable sometimes.
I lived there alone for a semester, and it was just one of those things where you never really felt alone.
Yeah, basically.
And I attribute that to just, again, the sheer energy of the place.
And how often I came to visit.
Right?
That was the feeling in my house growing up too. But
Yeah.
then again, my house was a place that people were coming and going because it was
Yeah,
daycare.
It's
So
a business.
you always felt like someone was there. Anyways, we should probably.
Yeah, anyways,
Maybe
we went on
probably.
for way too long, like we always do.
This is our Halloween special. It's fine.
it's our Halloween
I could go
special.
on about all the more ghosts.
Right.
But we can wrap this up. I
Yeah.
once had a psychic tell me that my mom's ghost was there next to me during a card reading.
Oh, interesting.
That's about all there is to say about that, honestly.
Just leave it at that.
I know, like, we can talk about all kinds of weird ghost stories, but I feel like we told some documented older ghost stories and
Yeah.
ghost locations. We talked about ourselves.
Yeah.
And this has been a pretty spooky Halloween.
Yeah.
Spooky Halloween.
Spooky.
It's definitely a fun way to spend our evening talking about this stuff. So
I love talking about this stuff.
I'm going to edit this real quick and put it up on the channel in like an hour. So
Yeah.
if there's any of you that are looking for something to listen to on Halloween evening, please,
late at night on Halloween Eve.
right? Listen to our ghost stories. Share your own in the comments.
Please.
Do you buy into some of the stories that we had talked about? The more popular ones, that sort of thing. We talked a little bit about the definition of what makes a ghost versus just
Right.
energy or a spirit or
Tell
whatnot.
me your thoughts
So,
on ghosts. Tell me why you think I'm wrong. But have a happy Halloween night.
be safe, have fun,
Or don't. And stay nerdy.
stay nerdy.